Shalom, Izzy here with Holy Language Institute at holylanguage.com. I wanted to look with you at the names of Simon Peter and what they meant in Greek and also in Hebrew. What's especially interesting is that he had this Greek name Petros, in English we say Peter, and it actually also meant something in Hebrew. And you can see a couple places in the Gospels and another place in Jewish history where this is recognized. So this is from the Gospel of John, Yochanan, in the first chapter. And this is interesting here because he uses a smattering of Hebrew words and then he gives the translation into Greek. So for instance, Andrew says to his brother Simon, "We found the Messiah." And in the Greek version of John, it actually says Messias. That word is used only twice. Here, and then also in John chapter 4, where the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well says, I know that Messias is coming. And then he actually uses that, so he uses that word in kind of its Greek form, and then he actually, which translated, of course, means Christos, Christ, which is the anointed one. All right, so Simon meets Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua, and he says to him, "You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. Okay, so we have a ton of names going on here, right? And I'm sure you noticed the Hebrew here. This is the translation of the Gospel of John from the translation of Professor Franz Delitzsch, who was a world-class Christian Hebraist who lived in the 1800s. He translated the New Testament into biblical-style Hebrew. And so I thought it would be kind of neat if I showed you what those words would be in Hebrew. Okay, so Shimon, that's Simon. Ben, the son of Yochanan, that's John. And then he says, "You'll be called Kepha." So this is an Aramaic name, actually, Kepha. You can tell because there's an aleph on the end, and Aramaic words often end with the aleph, whereas Hebrew words end with the letter Hey. Of course, it's written here not in Aramaic script, but in Hebrew script, and that's common. Okay, so Kepha, and then so the Greek version of that is Cephas. So from Aramaic Kepha, you get Cephas, and this word has the sense of a rock. And then it says Vahu v'Yavanit, and so that is in. Okay, so the country of Greece in Hebrew, it's called Yavan, and which is interesting because that name means like almost like quicksand, like slick, sticky mud. Anyway, so word is like it's used in the Psalms, for instance, when David's like, "I'm sinking, God, in the mud, like pull me out." Anyways, so the language of Yavan is Yavanit, and so it says in Yavanit it's Petros, no Peter. And this is weird too, because like in Greek you say Petros, but then for some reason in English it's chopped to Peter. So I don't know, like Cephas is an Aramaic name, but then, okay, sorry, I'm starting to nerd out on you. It's probably just tradition, but I do think it's kind of weird that like sometimes the us is kept on the end of names, and then sometimes it's not. Let's keep going. I want to show you something interesting. So this is our English translation of the Greek Gospel of John. Now, Eastern Christians have, since ancient times, read from the Aramaic New Testament, and that's often called the Peshitta, and they even claim it's the original. So there's a question, in the Christian world, the broader Christian world, between East and West, and then also in the academic world, with regards to what the original language of the New Testament was. And there are some cogent arguments on both sides. What we can agree on is that the context of the New Testament was Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. His guys and gals were Jewish, and the people who wrote the New Testament were Jewish. So regardless of whether they wrote in Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, we can agree that we need to read the New Testament in that original Semitic context. Now, this is interesting though, because when you look at the Peshitta, the Aramaic New Testament, you can see, so he's called Shimon, that's Simon, Bere, so that's the bar of the son of de Yonah. So actually, in the Greek it says the son of John. In the Aramaic it says Jonah. Why is this interesting? Well, because in the Gospel of Matthew he's actually referred to as Simon, son of Jonah. So it could be that the Aramaic is more accurate and the Greek was a translation, and that there might have been a scribal error or something. Yonah and Yochanan or they're actually kind of similar. Okay, so again, there's a question there. Anyway, so it says, so ant, you will be titkare, you will be called Chefa. All right, so there's the Aramaic Kefa, and that's the end of the verse. So did you notice that? That's kind of interesting. The Greek version says, which translated is, but then the Aramaic version doesn't do that, because, well, could it be that it's earlier? Could it be that maybe the Greek is a translation? Whatever the case may be, not only can we agree that the context of the New Testament is Jewish, and so that's something to be taken note of, we can also agree that both the Greek and the Aramaic texts are very early and they're reliable. So it's not like it has to be one or the other. However, I do think there's value in studying the Aramaic New Testament because it's closer to the original language or languages of Yeshua and his disciples. Hebrew and Aramaic were both spoken as living languages in the Second Temple era. Right, so now here's something really interesting. This name Petros, that's a Greek name, but there is a Hebrew word pitar, and that's a verb, and it means several things. And it's almost like this Greek name could have a Hebrew meaning also, in addition to its Greek meaning as rock. And I want to show you really quickly a couple examples of that. So this is Jastro's Dictionary of Talmudic Hebrew. And if maybe you've heard conspiracy theories about the Talmud, or maybe you just hate Judaism, and so you're like, did you just say Talmud? I can't listen to you anymore. Don't be scared. The word Talmudic Hebrew, there was Biblical Hebrew, which is the Hebrew in which the Bible was written up to Malachi. When the Jewish people came back from Babylon, Hebrew was still a living language, and so it continued to develop over time. So the Hebrew that was used in the Second Temple era, and then for a couple hundred years after the Second Temple was destroyed, that's often referred to as Mishnaic Hebrew, because it's the language that the Mishnah was written in, which is proof that Hebrew was a living language in the time of Yeshua, and then after that. And it's also referred to as Talmudic Hebrew, right? So you don't have to be scared of that. Not that everything in the Talmud is good, right, and true, but it's valuable historically. And just because someone mentions that word doesn't mean you have to stop the video, all right? Anyways, so having said that, please don't be scared off. Here is how this word was used in some different meanings that it had in the time of Yeshua. There are a couple forms of this verb, the nifal form and the hitpa'el form, and it means to be exempt. Why is that interesting? Because, remember this story? It's one of my favorite stories. It's only told in the Gospel of Matthew. It's this little one-on-one conversation between Yeshua and Simon. And Yeshua, one of the things he tells him is, the sons are free. They're exempt from paying taxes. And guess what that word is in Hebrew? This is Franz Delitzsch's translation. Habanim, the sons, peturim. So they're Peters. And remember, this guy's name is Peter. Isn't that interesting? It's a Greek name, but it means something in Hebrew. Now, here's another thing that this can mean. It can mean to be dismissed, to take leave, to depart, especially to depart this world or to die. Can you think of a time when Simon Peter used similar language? At the beginning of his second letter, he said, I'll also be diligent that at any time after my departure, you'll be able to call these things to mind. Well, guess what that would be in Hebrew? My patira. So basically it's like saying, once I peter out, once I pitar, once I leave, you'll still be able to remember these things, and that's my intent in writing them down. So once again, regardless of whether you're reading the Bible in English or Aramaic or Greek or whatever language, when you understand the original context of the New Testament, and you understand that the authors of the New Testament had a Hebraic mindset, you're going to start seeing connections. And this isn't just in the writings of Peter. You see this definitely in the writings of Paul also. I actually have a course called, it's a Hebrew verses course. So we read through a book of the Bible in Hebrew, like word by word, verse by verse. And I actually work through the epistle of St. Paul to the Romans in Hebrew. And I show example after example of his Hebrew mindset and the underlying Semitic thought forms that he shows in that letter. So if you're interested in that, check it out. You go to holylanguage.com, and then in the Learn section, you'll see our Hebrew verses courses, and you'll see the Hebrew verses course working through Romans. I'm going to show you one more example of this. This is really incredible. I'm sorry I can't spend more time on this too, but just want to give you kind of a whirlwind overview. Okay, here's the primary meaning of this word, pitar. It means to break through or to open. This word is used in the Torah, for instance, in reference to a first offspring or a firstborn. For instance, in this case, of a donkey. And here's the phrase in Hebrew, peter chamor. What's the Hebrew word for a first offspring or firstborn? Peter. Why? Because it's the one to open the womb. And in fact, there are a couple places in the Torah where that's the exact term that's used. Peter rechem. A peter is like the opener of, rechem is the womb. So that's a firstborn. So the name Peter has the sense of being the first one out, the firstborn. Why is that interesting? Well, because look at the role that he played, like in the early, in that initial circle of Yeshua's disciples. There was this question of who was the greatest. He was probably up there. It seems like there was this fight between Peter and maybe Andrew on the one side, they were brothers, and then James and John, they were brothers on the other side, and they all wanted to be the greatest. They were like, I want to sit on your right hand and your left hand when you're the king and you sit on your throne, right? So anyways, and then also you definitely see he was front and center in the early Yeshua movement. You read the book of Acts, and he was the one who would stand up and just call the Sanhedrin on the carpet for murdering an innocent man. He didn't back down. And so he did kind of act like he was a firstborn. You could almost, in the relationship that a rabbi had with his disciples, the rabbi was like the spiritual father. He was even addressed as father, and then his disciples were like his sons, and he would even address them as as my sons, my children, which is interesting because there are a couple places in the Gospels where Yeshua addresses his disciples as his sons or his children. Remember at the end of John, he appears on the beach. And he's like cooking fish. And he's like, children, did you catch anything? Remember that story? Well, like if you read that in Hebrew, for instance, he says, my sons, did you catch anything? It's very touching. Because, of course, that's the relationship that we can have with Rabbi Jesus also. It's like this relationship in which he's your spiritual, almost like your spiritual father. Almost he can fill this emotional role in your life as your dad. Teaching you and guiding you through situations and listening to you and giving you the advice you need and offering strength and support. All of those things are true of the rabbi-disciple relationship that either you have or that you could have with Rabbi Yeshua. And his disciples did call him rabbi all over the place in the New Testament. So it's okay to call Jesus your rabbi. That's one of his titles. It's who he is. Jesus was a rabbi. And if you believe what Scripture says, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever, then there's a rabbi who's coming back to rule the world. That's something to look forward to. All right, so here's now I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but there's some Jewish literature written roughly around the 1200s, and it talks about lots of things. One of the things it talks about is that it acknowledges that okay, I'm not gonna unpack this too much. When Jews would convert to Christianity, they had Hebrew names, of course, and they would start referring to them by like a kind of a butchered version of their name that had a derogatory sense. So, for instance, if a guy's name was Avraham, they would call him Afram, which means dust. It says Vafilu, and they would even do this to a tzaddik, to a righteous person. And the example given, Kagon, the example given is Shimon Kepha. Who's that? That's Simon Peter. So this is interesting because this Jewish text acknowledges that Simon Peter was a tzaddik. He was a righteous man. He was a good Jew. But then, unfortunately, over the centuries, Christianity turned into a very Gentile religion that incorporated a lot of pagan elements to the point where, in many ways, it wasn't even biblical anymore. And it definitely did not resemble Judaism. And Simon Peter got hijacked. And unfortunately, just like there were times when Christianity misrepresented Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, to his own Jewish people, Christianity also misrepresented his Jewish apostles, like Simon Peter, to the Jewish people. So there was a point when they started referring to him in a derogatory way. Instead of referring to this tzaddik, this righteous person, as Shimon Kefa, they referred to him as Peter Chamor. So what does that mean again? Remember, Peter, but in Hebrew, you have this Hebrew equivalent, Peter, the firstborn of Chamor. What's a Chamor? A donkey, like we have in the Torah here. So basically, they took this phrase from the Torah, firstborn of a donkey, and they referred to Simon Peter as that. So that's interesting because you can see that I'm not just making this up. This idea that Petros was a Greek name, but it also had a meaning in Hebrew, and maybe Yeshua and his disciples were kind of like, this is interesting, let's go with this. You can definitely see that in Jewish history also. The broader Jewish community was like, Petros, that also has a meaning in Hebrew. Let's go with this, and we'll call him Peter Chamor, firstborn of a donkey. If you want to learn more about how Simon Peter was referred to in Jewish history and actually recognized in a positive way, he even contributed he wrote some prayers that made it into the Jewish prayer service. This is information that I got from First Fruits of Zion. It's a ministry that I highly recommend. They have an article entitled Remembering Simon Peter. So Google something like FFOZ, or if you're Canadian, Google FFOZ, Simon Peter, and it'll remember, Simon Peter, remembering Simon Peter, something like that, and it'll turn up and you can get more information on that. All right, so anyways, that was something I wanted to share with you, and I hope that this raises some questions in your mind. If you grew up learning the Bible, you might have gotten to this point where you got bored. You're like, okay, I've kind of heard most of the same stuff, and I'm getting bored with this. I grew up as a pastor's kid, and I hit that by the age of 15 or 16. And, of course, teenagers just know everything. Maybe not when you're like 12 or 13. By the time you're 15 or 16, you pretty much know it all. So, of course I had that attitude. But some of it was kind of true for me. Like, I don't know, like sermons were beginning to just sound like the same rehashed stuff, and it was boring. And quite frankly, so for me, I reclaimed my Jewish heritage, and I came back to that, and I really got into Hebrew, went over to Israel, spent, multiple trips, spent over about a year in Israel in total, became a member of a conservative synagogue, started going to synagogue regularly. I did all these things in a way that saved my faith because it wasn't boring anymore. I was like, wow, Judaism is biblical, and I'm doing things that Jesus did that I never did as in my more Christian years. And also, like, learning Hebrew, it's a new language. It's like it's reading the Bible as if for the first time. It's seeing things through fresh eyes. And like I already shared with you, you're just learning about the Jewishness of Jesus in the New Testament. Oh, like that was a big thing for me. And so that really has become my passion, and in some ways I believe my life's calling. And I'm really happy to share some of that with you right now. So I hope it lights you up inside. I hope that you feel this drawing to learn more about Yeshua as the Jewish rabbi. I hope that you feel this inspiration to really begin to explore the original Semitic context of the New Testament. If that's stuff that interests you, you may find this interesting. The stuff we covered is just a little bit. It's a takeaway from my most recent Mishnah Snapshots lesson. I have this ongoing course called Mishnah Snapshots. So we're going through the Mishnah. We're going through some of the earliest Jewish texts, commenting on the Torah, and describing the Jewish world of Jesus and his disciples. And I'm giving you snapshots. I'm showing you specific places where it does that. And so if that's something that would be interesting to you, come see us at holylanguage.com. And in the Learn section, you'll see our Mishnah Snapshots course. This was a takeaway from Lesson 56. I would love to have you go through all of Lesson 56 with me. So anyways, that's my invitation to you. And in the meantime, I just want to encourage you to keep following Yeshua. Never lose him as your first love. Just keep the fire of the Spirit burning bright and hot in your heart and life. And let's keep encouraging each other. And hopefully you've definitely felt that in this Mishnah Snapshots takeaway. Shalom to you.